The night was heavy with golden lights and soft music as the guests poured into the lavish ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above their heads, champagne glasses clinked, and laughter filled every corner. It was the wedding of the year, the powerful CEO, Richard Hensley, marrying the daughter of another influential tycoon. Cameras flashed, media crowded the gates, and the atmosphere was nothing short of extravagant. But behind the glamour, behind the smiles and expensive suits, there was a story no one expected to unfold. A story that began with a trembling voice and a pair of frightened eyes. Michael Turner stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, not as a guest, but as a quiet observer. A single dad and a war veteran, Michael had learned to notice things others ignored, the unspoken cries, the faintest signs of distress, the hidden wounds. His own life had been a battlefield beyond the war, raising his little daughter, Emily, alone after losing his wife years ago. Tonight, he was simply a hired security consultant for the event. But fate had a way of pulling him into battles he never planned to fight. As the master of ceremonies announced the bride and groom, the guests erupted in applause. Suddenly, a hush fell over the hall. A young woman, dressed in a simple maid's uniform but forced into stage lights, was brought forward by two stern-looking men. She was visibly pregnant, her hands trembling as she clutched a microphone. Michael noticed the way her eyes darted around the room, not with joy, but with terror. Her name, he later learned, was Grace Miller. She had been working as a maid in the Hensley household, and now, against her will, she was being forced to sing at this grand wedding. Her voice cracked as she tried to sing, tears streaming down her cheeks. The guests looked uncomfortable, whispering among themselves, but no one intervened. The CEO's family acted as though nothing was wrong. Michael's instincts kicked in. He had seen this kind of fear before, not in ballrooms but in war zones, when innocent people were made pawns for power. Something about Grace's trembling hands and desperate eyes stirred his heart. She wasn't just nervous. She was trapped. Michael quietly slipped away from the crowd and approached one of the waiters, asking about her. The young man whispered, "She didn't want to do this. She begged them. But Mr. Hensley's men threatened her. She's carrying someone's child, and if she refuses, they'll ruin her." Michael's jaw clenched. It wasn't just about humiliation, it was about control and cruelty. Grace was being punished for something, and forced into the spotlight to break her spirit. When Grace's voice faltered, one of the guards barked at her from the side, "Keep singing." Her shoulders shook as she tried again, her voice barely holding steady. Michael couldn't stay still anymore. With calm but firm steps, he walked toward the stage. The guards stiffened, but there was something in Michael's stance, the quiet authority of a soldier, that made them hesitate. He gently placed a hand on Grace's trembling arm and whispered, "You don't have to do this." She looked at him, shocked, as though no one had ever said those words to her before. The crowd murmured in confusion. Richard Hensley scowled from his table. "Who is that man? What is he doing?" he demanded. But Michael didn't back down. He turned to the room, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the music. "This young woman is not an entertainer. She is not here by choice. She is being forced, humiliated, and broken in front of all of you. And I won't let that happen." Gasps filled the hall. Grace covered her face, sobbing. The guards moved forward, but Michael's steel gaze froze them in place. He wasn't just a man, he was a soldier, and they could see it. The CEO's anger boiled over, but Michael picked Grace up, steadying her trembling frame, and guided her off the stage. Emily, his little daughter, who had been quietly sitting with a caretaker nearby, ran to him, clutching his leg. Grace looked at the small girl, and for the first time that night, she smiled faintly through her tears. That was the beginning of a storm. Word spread quickly, whispers turned into headlines. CEO's maid forced to sing at wedding rescued by veteran father. Michael found himself dragged into a conflict he hadn't sought, but now he couldn't turn back. Grace revealed her story to him in the days that followed. She had worked in the Hensley mansion for years, loyal and hardworking. But when she became pregnant, carrying the child of one of the CEO's corrupt relatives, they wanted her silenced. Firing her wasn't enough. They wanted to disgrace her, make her a warning to others. That wedding performance was her punishment. Michael's heart ached as he listened. He saw in her the same struggle he faced, fighting alone, with the world stacked against you. Emily, innocent and kind-hearted, quickly grew attached to Grace, often hugging her swollen belly and whispering, "Your baby is going to be my friend." Grace would cry silently, touched by a kindness she hadn't known in so long. But the challenges came hard and fast. Richard Hensley wasn't about to let his reputation crumble because of a maid and a stubborn veteran. He sent threats, menacing calls, and even tried to bribe Michael into silence. But Michael had faced worse than this. "I didn't survive the battlefield just to surrender to cowards in suits," he told Grace firmly. Still, the danger was real. Men followed them. Grace's health grew fragile under the stress. And Michael's own finances, stretched thin raising Emily, became another battle. Yet, in the quiet nights, when Michael would sit on the porch with Grace, talking under the stars while Emily slept, something began to heal inside both of them. Grace found safety in his presence, and Michael found warmth he hadn't felt since his wife's passing. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were slowly building something like hope. The turning point came when Grace went into labor early. It was a stormy night, rain lashing the windows, and the power flickered. Michael rushed her to the hospital, Emily clutching his hand tightly, terrified. Hours later, Grace gave birth to a baby boy, fragile but alive. She cried as she held him, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." Michael stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, tears in his own eyes. For a soldier who had seen so much death, witnessing new life was overwhelming. The media soon uncovered the truth, the corruption, the threats, the cruel punishment Grace had endured. Public outrage turned against Richard Hensley. The empire he had built began to crack. And through it all, Michael stood firm, protecting Grace and her newborn son like they were his own. In time, the storm passed, but something new remained. A family, not bound by blood alone, but by courage, sacrifice, and love. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Michael watched Emily giggling as she played with Grace's baby boy. Grace stood beside him, her hand slipping into his. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Michael smiled softly. "You don't need to. Just live free. That's enough." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to dream again, not of battles or survival, but of peace, love, and a future he never thought he'd have. And in that moment, the single dad veteran, the pregnant maid, the little girl, and the newborn child became something far greater than the cruelty they had faced. They became a family.